A bunch of weapon buffs and changes were announced by Super Earth High Command, codename Arrowhead, over the past few days. So today we're taking a closer look at each of them and ranking them in our ultimate buff update tier list. Now, while some weapons may appear to be ranked lower than others, just remember that such an act would be undemocratic, and as a result, we will remind you that even weapons ranked D means D for democratic. So we'll go in order of the announcements. The first was the highly anticipated flame-based weapon reversion. Let's face it, the Escalation of Freedom update really put a serious damper on flame weapons, making them pretty much useless against even the Terminids. And the automatons, forget it. Those clankers had fireproof plating. Well, the fact is that nobody liked this. Nobody at all. In fact, it may be one of the main reasons the Chaos Divers became a thing, not even kidding around. So to undo the impact brought about by this really strange change, High Command have prioritized this and brought all flame-based weapons back to their pre-escalation of freedom levels. But from what's been shared, it looks like the major changes are just getting started. A huge frustration, sometimes bordering on undemocratic, with flamethrowers was that they weren't able to inflict any real kind of damage against heavier enemies. But with this buff, Helldivers will in fact be able to take on Terminid charges and even automaton hulks. Just don't forget that hulks also have flamethrowers, so you might come off second best with them. So to sum it up, flame-based weapons are getting a 33% damage increase as well as armor penetration, which is well deserved as our flame-based weapons should burn like the lights of a billion suns. But remember, this isn't just flamethrowers, it affects flames in general. So this should mean that the Flam 40 flamethrower, G10 incendiary grenade, Flam 66 torture, and P72 crisper should all be getting a buff. It's also totally possible that this will extend to stratagems that include napalm strikes or barrages. So for fans of fire, this should be the ultimate upgrade. So based on just how much of a difference this should make to so many weapons and stratagems, we're putting this buff straight in S tier. S for super democratic. Now, the next buff that was announced was yet another much called for one. That's right, the RS-422 railgun has received some very worthy upgrades too. So this thing was already pretty beastly before. It just wasn't all that great against Terminid charges and Bile Titans if we're honest. But although the railgun already did some totally righteous damage, Helldivers just wanted more. Again, the big complaint was that heavier enemies didn't really feel the pinch when the railgun was used against them. This makes sense because there were two significant changes done to the old railgun which led us here today. The first was a reduction to the penetration rounds. I'd like to believe that armor-piercing rounds had become scarce within our supply lines. The worst change, however, was that the railgun was nerfed again. In quick succession, it received a reduction to its damage output which was somewhere between 50 and 60%. So to make up for this, High Command went and nearly quadrupled the railgun's durable damage from 60 to 225. For those of you who don't know, durable damage is based on how durable an enemy part is and calculated as a percentage of standard damage plus durable damage. Put more plainly, the railgun will definitely pack more wallop than it did before, especially against bigger hostiles. And on top of the increase in durable damage, the railgun will also do 100% more damage than before when fully charged and fired. It's pretty clear that High Command have gone all out with the railgun here, but some Helldivers believe this is kinda overkill. Some apparently just want to spread liberty and justice with their fists alone. Still, it's a change that makes the railgun far more attractive than it was before, and with many Helldivers having abandoned it entirely, there's a strong chance it'll become a popular choice once again. All things considered, and just because the railgun will probably be overpowered now, we're putting this one right up there in S tier along with the flame-based weapon buff for Super Earth. The third buff that got announced was for the SG-225 Breaker shotgun. When our offensives kicked off months ago, the Breaker was a favorite among Helldivers due to its high level of stagger and fire rate. After all, nothing staggers better than auto shotgun fire dispensed by a true patriot. But again, with nerfs, the Breaker became less effective and fell out of favor with many troops. Thankfully, the higher-ups have done their homework and listened to feedback. So for all intents and purposes, the Breaker should be back to its former glory. For starters, the Breaker now has an ammo capacity of 16 instead of 13, basically back to what it was before its magazine was reduced due to an anomalous design change. Now this might not seem like much, but 3 shells can spell the difference between life and death in a lot of nasty situations. But best of all, the Breaker's stagger force has also been increased from 10 to 15. That's a full 50% extra, meaning the stopping power against all enemy types will be noticeably and necessarily higher than before. And if there's anything we love, it's putting a stop to backwards socialist plots. This is overall really exciting exciting news for the men and women of the SCAF, since the breaker was, at one point, the preferred weapon of many a Helldiver. Seeing it restored to its former state of effectiveness brings tears to our just and true eyes, and we're sure many of you feel the same. However, there was no mention of the recoil being reverted from 55 back to 30, which means accuracy may still be a problem when using the breaker. Careful in holding down that trigger, soldiers. For this reason, we're putting this one in A tier. A for amazingly democratic. Why? Well, because the handling seemingly remains unchanged. Still, a great buff and a necessary one to ensure humanity's continued survival in the galaxy. Alright troops, now don't panic, because the fourth announced change is actually a nerf. Dun dun dun! But it's the good kind, because in this case, the damage rocket devastators can dish out to Helldivers is actually what's been reduced. These bots have been a major pain in the democratic keister in the past since they fired volley after volley of missiles at squads of Helldivers. Naturally, this has been a source of frustration for many a brave soldier, but thankfully with resource shortages and reallocations, the bots have been forced to reduce rocket devastator capabilities by a fair margin. Take that, you rust bucket scum. So with this development, rocket devastators will have limited ammo, meaning they can only fire about 3 salvos at a target before they run out. They'll also only get 1 reload pack, and after that, they won't be able to fire any more missiles. In this case, you'll have the perfect opportunity to strike back, Helldivers. This change is definitely helpful, especially if you have a pack of these rotten clankers on your back. What's more, the actual collision of the missiles rocket devastators fire has been reduced by a full 80% with ongoing problems with guidance systems, meaning you should have a much easier time dodging them now. Oh, and according to intel from the Ministry of Truth, these changes have also affected bot gunships, meaning they'll actually run out of ammo at some point. Just how quickly these flying abominations will run short on rockets is something we can only speculate on, but hopefully they won't absolutely wipe the floor with you like before. So with this particular nerf, which is for the bots, we've got ammo caps on rocket devastators and gunships, and at the very least, lower collisions for missiles fired by devastators. A most welcome and democratic change indeed. For this reason, we're going to go ahead and put this one right up there in S tier as well. We don't think anyone is going to be unhappy about this situation, unless you're a bot sympathizer, of course. Haha! Now we get to yet another favorite among the Federation's top warriors, the R36 Eruptor. The Eruptor has actually remained a popular choice for Helldivers owing to the damage it is able to inflict on enemies from a fair distance. However, in the past, due to problems with the breaker's shrapnel, it was completely removed from the weapon by the Ministry of Science's top engineers. Later, the Eruptor got a very decent buff with its total damage being increased from 420 to 570 per shot. Similarly, its explosion damage was also nearly doubled from 190 to 340. It just goes to show you what can be achieved when the Ministry of Science really puts their minds to it. So while no Helldiver really asked for this, High Command decided to further augment the Eruptor's already impressive capabilities. The first thing they did was to reintroduce the shrapnel, but the right kind this time. Basically, the Eruptor now makes use of the same shrapnel as frag grenades, so this means the chances of one-shotting your fellow Helldivers should be significantly reduced. Unless you somehow shoot them in the head, of course. As General Brash says, friendly fire isn't. And with this latest augmentation, our troops will be getting more shrapnel as well as an explosion radius that's a whole 33% bigger. So in short, no real damage buffs here. But some of the key features of the Eruptor have been reintroduced and improved to make it even more democratically devastating than ever before. Now, we're not sure how necessary these buffs were, even though they are very much welcome. So for this reason, we're putting this one in B tier. B for bureaucratically brilliant, since the previous buffs already made the Eruptor a more than viable choice on the battlefield. Outstanding stuff, soldiers. The sixth announced buff concerns a weapon that has actually been somewhat problematic since we began our campaign against the bots and the bugs earlier this year. We're of course referring to the Arc 3 Arc Thrower, which actually caused issues for several troops due to a few design flaws in the initial versions of the weapon. A fix was then introduced to correct some anomalies with the weapon's charging times. However, these changes also resulted in a reduction in how far the Arc Thrower's electricity could travel, decreasing from 50 to 35 meters. But to compensate for this, our engineers increased its stagger force, a most righteous choice for lovers of freedom and liberty. Regrettably though, this reduction in range made the Arc Thrower a lot less attractive for many Helldivers, so it fell out of favor with a number of loyal soldiers of Super Earth. In examining feedback from our troops, Super Earth's leadership commissioned the Ministry of Science to introduce several improvements to the Arc Thrower. First on the list was to revert the Arc Thrower's range back to its previous liberated level. As a matter of fact, this has effectively been increased from 35 meters to 55, so even farther than before the nerf was introduced. Can our enemies hide from the reach of truth? Of course not. A particularly nice touch that the R&D team introduced is a stun effect that actually stacks on targets the more a Helldiver fires the weapon, which actually makes a whole lot of sense if you ask me. Those bots and bugs should be reeling from the power humanity wields. But while these improvements are very much welcome, it's possibly the arc thrower's durable damage being doubled from 50 to 100 that now makes it an even more viable option. The final adjustment to the arc thrower is that it will now jump more times, which is great if you want to take out multiple enemies, but not so great if your fellow Helldivers are around. To put it bluntly, the arc thrower is now more potent, but also something that can do more damage to both friends and foes. So if your squad mates are liberated from critical thought, they may not survive long enough if you use the arc thrower around them. This might actually be the biggest overhaul on any weapon so far, and we think the arc thrower may soon become a favorite among the many members of our armed forces. So because of this, we're putting this one in the super democratic S tier. The noble arc thrower has deserved a lot more for a long time, so we're hoping these upgrades will resonate well with the majority of Helldivers. And last, but certainly not least, we're taking a look at the final announced change as part of the September 17th Armory update, the buff to the 500 kg bomb. There's really nothing subtle or nuanced about this particular buff, since the Eagle 500 kg is really just a super big explosion. But is anyone actually complaining about this? To do so would be nothing short of treason. Now in the past, although it looked like a really big boom when the 500 kg dropped, it didn't do nearly as much damage as advertised. High Command decided to dispatch a field observation team to determine what was happening with this stratagem. Without going into too much detail, their work contributed to ensuring that the explosion you see in front of your freedom-loving eyes actually does what it's supposed to and kill a whole bunch of disgusting enemies at once. This buff has been applauded as a good move by the vast majority of troops, but know this: with a bigger explosion, you're going to have to keep well back if you don't want to be burned up by the blast. Freedom's flame does not discriminate, nor does it fail to purify any in its path. So when facing off against larger enemies like Bile Titans or Chargers, the Ministry of Defense advises that you run like hell, diver, and take cover the moment you deploy the stratagem. We definitely think this is a useful stratagem, but of course, it's not the only one available for use in the field. And now with the orbital napalm barrage being requisitioned system-wide, we're wondering whether the 500 kg will fall out of favor or become a favorite among the Helldiver Corps. In light of all this, we're going to put this final buff in C tier. C for courageously democratic, of course. This is by no means a bad or underwhelming change. However, we feel that careless Helldivers may inflict unintended casualties in the pursuit of democracy and justice. This is regrettable, but something we admit we may not be able to fully avoid. And that's our take on all the buffs and changes High Command has announced and has introduced with this latest update. So which of these buffs is the most significant to you? And how would you rank these improvements? Let us know in the comments section. However, be sure to keep it democratic, Helldivers. Also be sure to let us know what you'd like to see in future videos. We'd love to hear your feedback. So until next time, brave Helldivers, this is the SES signing off.